All right, so now it's time for the Q&A. We got some really interesting questions from you guys, so thanks for that. We'll try and answer as many as we can before our time is up.
Okay, so the first question is, how exactly do you retire off of stock and bond market investments? Is this a brokerage account rather than a 401k that you can withdraw money from early without being penalized? First part, how do you retire early off of stock and bond market investments in the first place, right? So it comes down to something called the 4% rule, which really is just kind of a rule of thumb. Like, it's not a hard and fast rule, but 4% is sort of this approximate value that people have agreed on. So the idea is that if you got a decent mix of stocks and bonds, and you withdraw no more than 4% of your portfolio's starting value every year for the rest of your life, plus inflation each year, you will probably never run out of money. In fact, in most cases, if you backtest it throughout history, in most cases, you actually get richer over time. You're not actually drawing down the portfolio. So it's like growing faster than you're taking money out of it, as long as you follow this 4% rule. So if you do like the inverse of 4%, what that really means is you need to save up and invest about 25 times, that's 1 over 0.04, 1 over 4%. You need to save and invest about 25 times whatever you spend in a year, your annual expenses. And if you have that much in investments, you can just retire forever. And so that means you don't have to work anymore if you don't want to. Although, to be honest with you, a lot of people who do this at a young age, like if you do it at 30 or 40, you probably end up working a little bit, maybe part-time, and still earning some extra money anyway, but you don't have to. So that's kind of the first part of the question, like, how do you do this in the first place? But I think what the second part of this is getting at says, is this a brokerage account rather than a 401k that you can withdraw money from without being penalized? Well, when most people think about investing, we've kind of been trained, right? The main investing that people have experience with is in their retirement accounts, usually their retirement account at work, usually a 401k. And so, people know, and they've been trained like, oh, these 401ks, these investment accounts, they have restrictions on them, right? Like with a 401k, you can't take any money out of that without a penalty until you're 59 and a half years old. There's some random exceptions to that, but for the most part, you gotta wait till you're 60 to take money out. So how do you get money out if you're going to retire at age 30, for example? Well, you got a few different options. So number one, you don't have to invest inside of a 401k or inside of an IRA or one of these government designated retirement accounts. You can invest in just a regular brokerage account. So this is called a taxable brokerage account. And the reason why it's usually called taxable is because you have to pay the full amount of capital gains and income taxes on the gains that you make inside of your investments in that account. So it doesn't have any special tax treatment. The reason all those retirement accounts that we were talking about, like 401ks and IRAs and stuff, the reason those exist is to give you a tax break. The government's trying to incentivize you to save for your own retirement. And they give you a little tax break if you save inside those accounts. But if you want to avoid all of the restrictions on those accounts, you can just invest in a regular taxable brokerage account. So in truth, we did a little mix of both. The 401k at work is like a really, really good deal most of the time, too good to pass up because your employer usually matches your contributions to those. So like, let's say you put in 3% of your paycheck into your 401k and your employer is willing to kick in an extra 3%. Well, if any employer offers you that, you should take it immediately because that is a immediate, instant, 100% gain on your money. And in fact, even if you pay the penalty to take the money out early, you still come out ahead after accounting for the employer match. So it's like literally a good deal no matter what, and you should always do that for sure. The other accounts, like for example IRAs, there's some tricks with that as well. Like the Roth IRA, you get some special tax treatment. And you also can take out your contributions, but not the gains early, before age 59 and a half. So there's a little bit of flexibility and leeway there. We also did Roth IRAs ourselves, especially in our earlier years. We were going hard maxing out the Roth IRAs every single year because of that flexibility that it adds and that tax break that you get. You end up not having to pay taxes on withdrawals on those after age 59 and a half. So those are really good. So we got the employer match on 401ks. We maxed out Roth IRAs, and then for the most part, the vast majority of our other saving went into a regular taxable brokerage account. And since we were saving such a large amount each year, we were saving 50, 60, 70, 80% of our incomes in a year. There was still, even after doing those two things, there was still lots of overflow to go into this taxable brokerage account. So it ends up that, we turned out with a lot of money sitting around our taxable brokerage account. That gives us lots of flexibility to do what we want. And then beyond that, we can always tap those retirement accounts at a later age or according to certain tricks. There's also even more tricks. There's this thing called a Roth conversion ladder that lets you get money out early. Bottom line here is there's a lot of different options for you of how to get money out early. And honestly, if I'm being real with you, you're probably going to make some income in retirement anyway, and you probably will tap these accounts a lot less than you think you will. So don't worry too much about it. Second question, do you recommend any index funds in particular? Yeah, so definitely can give you some of those. Quick refresher for anybody who doesn't know what an index fund is. So let's take an example. Very popular index fund, VTI. It's the Vanguard Total U.S. Stock Market Index Fund. So what is this? What is an index fund? So it's called a Total U.S. Stock Market Index Fund, right? What does that mean? It means that this fund, this ticker symbol that you can buy on the stock market, when you buy shares of this thing, VTI, you're actually buying simultaneously a tiny little slice of ownership in every single publicly traded company in the United States. So that's kind of what an index fund is. It just broadly purchases a diversified portfolio automatically on your behalf. Okay, so it follows these lists of stocks and stuff called indexes. That's the idea. So I can't really give investment advice because I'm not a professional investment advisor, but I can tell you what we do and what index funds we personally like and use. So VTI is one of them. That's that Total U.S. Stock Market Index Fund. And then the companion to that we use as well is VXUS. And so that's the Total World Stock Market Index Fund, excluding the United States. So combine VTI plus VXUS equals all the publicly traded stocks in the world, pretty much, with some exceptions. So this gives you this broadly diversified portfolio, and you end up getting the average return of all the stocks in the marketplace, which, if you look back historically, turns out to be a pretty good return. Turns out to be somewhere in the vicinity of like 10% per year nominally, and that's a pretty strong return. It goes way up and way down, so you have to be able to ride out the storms. You're going to go through some crashes, you're going to go through some huge booms and all that stuff, but in the long run, gives you a pretty substantial, pretty good return. Now, not everybody wants to weather these crazy storms of up and down. Nobody really wants to see their money go down, 50% in a year or two in a huge crash or something like that. So a lot of times people like to mix in bonds as well, which tend to be a little more stable. So there are also bond market index funds. So our favorite one, we do this. We mix in bonds as well for some stability there. Our favorite one is BND. So that's the Vanguard Total U.S. Bond Market Index Fund. And again, all it's doing is just buying automatically a giant mix of all the publicly issued investment grade bonds in the United States, so BND. So we've got our VTI and VXUS for stocks and our BND for bonds. Mix those together in some proportion that we're comfortable with. That has to do with risk, right? The more bonds you mix in, the less risk, but also the lower the return over the long run. Mix them together, you got yourself a really nice portfolio. We also own one rental property, so that's another investment as well. But for the most part, we stick to these index funds. I should also mention, you can make this even easier than we have. If you don't want to buy VTI plus VXUS, that's the whole world in two funds, you can buy the whole world in one fund. So there's actually a fund called VT that we did not know about when we started, and that's why we don't have it. But VT is actually an automatic combination of VTI and VXUS, so you don't have to buy two, you can just buy one, VT. Question 3 says, now that you've retired early, did you bring back any spending luxuries, or are you still on a strict budget? Actually, this is like a really common misconception about us. A lot of people think that in order to retire early, our spending was very low by like typical American standards, I guess. So a lot of people think we went on some kind of like financial diet or some kind of like strict budgeting plan or something like that. The real truth actually is we never set or followed a budget ever. So we didn't really restrict ourselves to some specific spending level. Our idea was basically, hey, it turns out you don't need that much fancy stuff to live a happy life. So why don't we just figure out how much we want to spend, to live the way we like, and then just save and invest all of the excess and just see how much that is. And it turned out that like throughout the years, it was something like $18,000 to $24,000 per year during mainly our accumulation years from like, I don't know, like 2012 to 2019, something like that. That's how much we needed to live a happy life. And so whatever the excess was, we just saved all of that. But the truth is, we weren't tracking it. We weren't like, yeah, we need to make sure that we spend under $24,000 this year. And if we go over, then we need to cut back so that we can fit within that. No, it actually is just we spent on the things that we really wanted and cared about and needed to live that happy life. And then it turned out to be that amount. So it's kind of the reverse of what everybody thinks. Next question is, how much do you think you typically spend when van traveling? That's a great question. We were actually really curious about that ourselves because we don't really track our spending at all. So we went back on one of our recent trips for a blog post, and we just looked over our credit card statements and kind of categorized them all in an Excel spreadsheet and figured out, where do we spend our money when we're traveling and how much is that? So on our 51-day trip that we took just last year, we did a whole breakdown on our blog. There's graphs and stuff if you want to see it. But the total for this 51-day trip was $3,679 over 51 days for two people. So that basically comes out to $36 per day per person. And on that particular trip, we were moving pretty fast, so we were burning quite a bit of gas. Gas was actually our number one expense at $1,200. So it's about 33%, about a third of the budget for that 51-day trip. And then next up beyond that was dining out, because obviously eating out, even if you don't do it for every meal, is pretty expensive. And we do eat out when we travel quite a bit. So spent $974 on eating out, about a quarter of the budget. And then there were groceries. Groceries are a little cheaper, $435, about 12% of the budget-ish. We also calculated in depreciation on the van because we put a lot of miles on it in those 51 days. So what we did was we did Kelley Blue Book value before, Kelley Blue Book value after with a whole bunch more miles put on it. Depreciation on the van was about $545, about 15% of that budget. And then a whole bunch of other stuff, like random entry to state and national parks, and I think we went to a concert on this trip, and we went to some other event that we had to buy tickets for, just random stuff like that. Other category was $525 on that trip, another like 14%, and that gives you our 51-day vacation. So like I said, $36 per day per person, not too bad. Grab yourself a buddy. Go on a nice long road trip, spend $36 a day for each of you, and you'll have a lot of fun. I highly recommend it. If you want to check out that article on our blog, it's called How to Take Months Off Work and Travel for $36 per day on tripofalifestyle.com.
All right, so question number 5 is, tell us more about your van. What type of van did you buy and why, and how much did it cost? So we were looking at a couple of different vans, mostly looking at the gas mileage and comparing them. So the Ford Transit Connect and the Nissan NV200 were the two that we were looking at because of their size and their gas mileage and their stealthiness. We ended up going with the Nissan NV200 because it drove really well. We liked that it was foreign, and we were able to test drive one locally at a dealership before looking on Craigslist for one privately. And so that's what we ended up doing, is buying private from a guy who, he actually owned a music store, and he had only used his van to transport instruments to and from trade shows. So it was like very low mileage. I want to say it was like 51,000 miles when we bought it. And he had bought it direct from the dealership himself back in 2013. So it was single owner, really great shape. And we paid $12,300, which was actually like the most we'd ever paid for a car. But given that we were planning to put a ton of miles on it, and drive it all the way to Alaska and back to Florida, we were like, oh, it's probably worth a little bit of a splurge for something that we knew would be reliable. But the gas mileage was like the key component as to why we wanted the NV200. It gets like 26 miles to the gallon, and given how many miles we were planning to put on it, it was well worth it for the investment there. And now it's up to 180,000 miles, so it's done pretty good for us.
All right, question 6. How did you build out your van for your road trips? This is a pretty interesting one because I think it's where we kind of differ from other van life people. We barely did anything to our van, if I'm really being honest with you. And I think the main reason is, a lot of people, I guess, think that they're going to go out on their van and they're going to be like off-road in a desert somewhere with no access to civilization for a week or more at a time, and they need to be fully self-sufficient. And we never designed our van for that type of trip. We've always felt on our road trips that getting from place to place, like you run into plenty of gas stations, and you're probably going to see a Walmart, and you're going to see places to go and to be and to get water and get ice and get food and get whatever you need. So we did not build our van with boondocking for a week or two at a time in mind. So with that said, pretty much all we did to convert it is we built out a wooden platform for the back of the van that the bed could sit on top of. Underneath that wooden platform, there's like 4 quadrants of storage space. And then that's pretty much it. It's a wooden platform with a bed on top. So the mattress that goes on top of it is an Allswell. It's this brand that's owned by Walmart. We got the hybrid version of the mattress. It was really cheap. I actually highly recommend it. It's been really comfortable, and we've had it for years now. So definitely recommend the Allswell. The wooden platform was just self-built. My stepdad helped me build that. We stuck some little dollar tap lights underneath in each of those storage quadrants so we could see at night. And we put some Eneloop rechargeable batteries in those. A later addition to the van, we did wire up a pure sine wave power inverter that was wired directly to the battery with the fuse, of course, so that we could charge our phones overnight, charge our laptops, and charge drone batteries, camera batteries, stuff like that while we drive. You definitely have to watch out if you wire that directly to the van battery instead of having a secondary battery like we did, because obviously you can kill your starter battery. So you just got to make sure that you're using that for low power stuff for short durations, or just while the van is running is fine. And we don't use it for very much, so it's never been an issue. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It's a platform with a bed on top, some tap lights, and a power inverter. That's our van. The total cost for all of those conversions was $500. So $12,300 for the van, $500 for our conversions. That's a total cost of $12,800 for our camper.
All right, so question number 7 is, without a kitchen in your van, what do you do for food? So we actually keep a propane burner, like camp stove, little Coleman. You can get the canisters at Walmart in our van, and we use that to heat up canned goods, soup, stuff like that. We also always have peanut butter and jelly staples in our van, as well as other snacks. But we actually do tend to eat out quite a bit when we travel. But we found some ways to shave money off of every time we go in to a restaurant by menu hacking. And so what that kind of entails is either splitting a dish between the two of us, or finding a way to order the things that we like but for cheaper. So instead of going with the menu item that's all advertised, picking out, a cheaper menu item off the value menu or sides and kind of cobbling together something. And it can end up adding up quite a bit when you're doing this every time, right? So for example, we like Beyond Burgers. Carl's Jr., which is a huge chain in the West, you can get a Beyond Burger, but the menu's like $7 for a Beyond Burger, $8 depending on the location, which per person, per burger, every time we go, that can add up quite a bit. So we actually order the cheapest burger on the menu, which is kind of hidden off in a corner. It's called the Big Hamburger. It's only a few dollars, and then you sub in a Beyond Patty. It ends up shaving like $3 off that total cost per burger every time we go, and that really adds up. So we look for little hacks like that. We found ways to save money at Chipotle, at Blaze Pizza, Even at Starbucks, we found some ways to cut our coffee costs. And we've got a lot of those examples on our blog too. All right, so question number 8 is, what do you do for showers? So, when we first started thinking about our initial van trip to all the national parks in our small build, we were thinking like, okay, what do we do for showers? Where can you shower? Where are places that have showers? And gym was like an obvious, solution there. So I looked up, what's the largest gym chain? Like, where are they everywhere? And Planet Fitness was actually one of the largest gym chains out there with locations all across the U.S., almost everywhere. And so I was like, cool, we'll just both get a membership. We can both shower anywhere. But it turns out that if you buy the Planet Fitness Black Card membership, which is like their elite level with like all these other amenities, it's only like $25 a month, and you can actually bring a person with you every time you go, and you can go to any location. So we only had to buy one membership between the two of us to go to any location and shower anytime we want. So that's our big hack. That's the one we use the most often. But sometimes you're somewhere, especially like in North Canada, where there's nothing, and there's not a Planet Fitness. So in those instances, we turn to like campgrounds where you have walk-up showers. You can pay a couple bucks. Sometimes they're coin operated. We'll check in with some friends. Hey, what's up? Let's get dinner, and can we use your shower? Public pools also often have showers. So do laundromats, and truck stops obviously are also pretty easy to come by. I've never actually done a truck stop shower, but they are available. And I think they only run like a few dollars too. But most of the time, it's been pretty easy to find showers, and it's not been an issue for us.
Question 9, how do you keep your expenses low when living van life? This one's interesting. The thing that people usually focus on are the sort of like life hacker things that we have to share, like our menu hacks or our hacks for getting showers really cheap anywhere we go. And those things are super helpful. But if you're doing van life for the first time and you're thinking about, okay, how am I going to do this affordably? Don't focus on the small stuff just yet. Focus really, really big. And there's 2 very big things that I think people miss a lot of times. Number 1, maybe seems a little obvious, but it's literally your van itself. How much does the van cost? Because you can spend an absolute fortune on these things. So, our van was $12,000. To us, that was a lot of money. $12,800 after the conversions, right? That's a lot of money. Most we've ever spent on a vehicle. But a lot of camper vans out there are $50,000 or $100,000. And that is a massive, massive difference. We're talking, several times the cost of the van that, we managed to get away with. So think about that, not just in terms of how much cash outlay you have to put out originally or how much your monthly payment will be, but even after your van is paid off, or even if you pay for it in cash and you have the money to afford it up front, think about this. There's actually an ongoing cost there, because if you have $100,000 tied up in a van as your asset, which is a depreciating asset, and you could have gotten away with a $10,000 or a $20,000 van, that is a difference of, $80,000 that you could have had sitting in investments like stocks and bonds, earning a return for you, and actually paying the bills on your trip for you while you're traveling. So think about it that way as well. The opportunity cost, the investment opportunity cost of getting a more expensive van, even if you have the cash to pay for it. It's really, really expensive in a lot of different ways. Number 2 is reducing your costs not just on your trip, but your costs back home while you're out on your van life trip. So a lot of people don't think about that, but that's one of the biggest costs of van life is what's going on back home. So if you own a home, what you can do is go on a longer trip and make it worthwhile to rent out your house while you're gone. So in some ways, a longer van life trip, like a multi-month trip, can actually wind up being cheaper than a shorter trip because it allows you the opportunity to put your stuff into storage or at a friend's house or family member's house and rent out your house and collect an income from it while you're gone, which can often be enough to pay for your entire trip by itself. If you're a renter, if you don't own a house, then think about just planning your trip with the end of your lease. Because if you go on a van life trip for 2 or 4 weeks or something like that while you have an apartment back home, you still have to pay rent that whole time. But if you wait for your lease to be up and then you go out and do van life for months at a time, the entire time you're gone, you have no rent back home. So your expenses are reduced by potentially, $1,000, $2,000 per month or something like that. So think about those two big things, the cost of your van and the opportunity cost of tying up cash in it, and the costs back home and how you can reduce them while you're gone on your trip. Those two things will add up to a lot more than a lot of the other smaller stuff that people tend to focus on. Question 10, this is probably the last one we'll have time for today. It says, do you work part-time when traveling in your van, and what is your office setup? So we actually do have a little bit of part-time work left. This is something we worry about sort of less and less as we're working less and less nowadays. But the best example of this was back in 2019 when we took a 7-month van life trip to all the national parks in the U.S. And we both had a remote work setup where we were working about 10 hours a week per person. And we had like regular responsibilities that we had to take care of every single week. And if you think about our van setup, it is not good for work. It's just a bed in the back. So it would be pretty miserable to try to use that as an office. And, the obvious expensive way you could solve that problem is get hotels whenever you have work to do. But that kind of defeats the purpose of the cheap minimalist van setup because you're just going to blow a bunch of money on hotels then, right? So our solution to that is something that we ended up calling the inverted work week. And the idea behind this is to sort of batch all the part-time work that you have to do while you're on your trip into like little 1 or 2 day spurts. So what you end up having is you'll go out and adventure and visit the national parks and do all kinds of cool, fun van life stuff for say 5 days in a row. And then you go, okay, I've been letting some work pile up. I need to get some work done. So drive to a town somewhere with good amenities, good access to civilization and stuff, and pop into, maybe a Starbucks the first day and a Panera Bread the second day, and just grab a cup of coffee and use that as your office space. They got free Wi-Fi. You can pretty much hang out as long as you want and get your work done. And it actually turned out for us that like having a day or two of work where we were not traveling and not adventuring and not hiking was actually a pretty nice break from the like constant travel adventure lifestyle. And it, I think, ended up making our 7-month adventure actually more like mentally and emotionally sustainable. So actually, if you can work out some sort of remote work arrangement or part-time or freelance arrangement with your employer or with clients that you might have, and if you can batch that work into little blocks like that, I highly recommend it. It works really well for van life. It can pay for your whole trip, and it really doesn't feel like work because it feels like almost a break that you needed from the travel you were doing. So work it out that way and just hit up a Starbucks or Panera. It's not too hard. If you like this kind of stuff, don't forget to subscribe or follow along on your favorite social media platform.